Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining another episode of the Educational Leadership Podcast. It's 2025 here. I think we're over 100 episodes now on the podcast, so it's a very exciting time. We do have another amazing superintendent. Before we introduce our guest, we do want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Ideal Impact. Ideal Impact's giving away hundreds of millions of dollars to public education in the form of a free gift. So if your district needs unrestricted funds, reach out to Ideal Impact. Okay, we have Superintendent Stevens from Keene ISD. Superintendent Stevens, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. I'm looking forward to it.
And I pronounced that right? Keene ISD.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, just so our listeners get to know you a little bit and maybe a little bit about your district, could you share kind of your district size and location, and then share a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Awesome. We are a 3A district, about 1,150 kids. We're about 18 miles south of Fort Worth. You go right down I-35, go west on 67, and if you blink, you might miss us. We are the third smallest landmass school district in the state of Texas, 4.2 square miles. Some uniqueness about us is we don't have bus routes, which is very interesting because state law only requires bus routes for kids over 2 miles away, and we don't have anyone that lives over 2 miles from our school. So
Huh.
right here in the middle of the Metroplex, basically, and just an oasis of education in Johnson County. We demographically, we're unique. We're about 40% Hispanic, about 40% white, but we are right at about 20% Marshall Islanders.
Huh.
And so the Marshall Islands were some islands out in the South Pacific that we actually tested some nuclear weapons on back in the 40s. And so there's a compact with our country and their country, and they settled here and in Arkansas and in the state of Washington. So it really gives us a cool culture here in Keene of that kind of island vibe as well. So that's our district. I'm in my 33rd year of education. I started really young in administration. I taught and coached for about 3 years down south a little bit in Diboll, Texas. After 8 years there, I went to Mineola and was high school principal for 13 years. And I've been superintendent here at Keene for 12. Had 3 girls graduate through here, and really do believe that we are a little hidden secret here in Johnson County.
That's fantastic. Yeah, very, very cool background. And I have 3 girls as well. So, hey, if they're going to the school you're responsible for, that's a good sign, I think. If you were sending them somewhere else, that would, I don't know, that might not be good, I guess.
Absolutely.
Well, very cool. So, interesting, right? So I haven't heard of anybody on the podcast with that uniqueness around the demographics. That's something special for sure. Um, so right now, there's a lot of focus areas in public education, and for our listeners, we are spreading the good word around public education. That is the purpose of this. Is that way our listeners can understand that every district's unique, every leader's unique, especially in Texas. Texas is unique from a lot of other states, and so what's a hot topic for you these days? What's your focus area of public ed? Anything kind of stand out from the rest?
Well, obviously one of the major focuses is around the discussion on school choice. We at Keene have kind of stayed out of the fray on that. Definitely have an opinion, but we try our best here to be the school of choice anyway. And we really feel like if we can create a culture and create an environment and create a family feel, that even if kids do have a choice to go wherever they want to, they're going to choose to come to us. So that's probably one of our biggest focuses. Years ago, probably 10, 11 years ago, we chose here at Keene to really de-emphasize test scores. We feel like that a kid is way more than just a number they make on a particular day. And that is shared throughout all of public education in the state of Texas, because we do so much more to make a well-rounded young man and woman than what they can do on an English, a math, science, or history test. We decided our vision and mission here at Keene ISD is to create makers of learning and not just takers. Being in my mid 50s now, a typical school for us was, listen Monday through Thursday, and on Friday the teacher would say, okay, now regurgitate that back to me on a test. And we really get away from that. And we want them to be responsible for their learning because we really feel that when they create, it becomes a part of who they are. And so when we really started getting into that, one of our last pillars of our mission and vision statement was to make our students here globally competitive. And when you think about globally competitive, the small school, small 3A school, a lot of times you're talking about how can you be competitive with, in our situation, an Alvarado, a Joshua, a Cleburne, a Burleson, a Fort Worth. In the state of Texas, you start talking about how do you be competitive with a South Lake Carroll or a Westlake, some of these big schools. And we really felt like the way to be competitive was for our kids to have an ability to do soft skills. So we have a huge emphasis here at Keene ISD on what we call the Keene 22. It's 22 statements that drive the lifeblood of our school. Things as simple as responding with yes, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. Holding the door open for people, never cutting in line, being positive, always doing your homework, things that seem like they're school related kind of things, but they're really the things that make you successful in life. So that when our kids do graduate from Keene High School and they do go for that job interview or they do go for that college interview and they look somebody in the eye, they shake their hand, they tell them who they are, they really get on that immediate maybe list, which gives them an opportunity then to be successful.
Got it. Got it. You brought up a good point on the test scores. That's something my wife and I have been talking about lately as well. Um, and we've kind of gone back and forth on the whole test score thing. So one of our daughters, for example, there's a test, I guess, to get into gifted and talented, right? I don't know if that's a state test or whatever. And we were talking, and this particular daughter, she's really good at the arts, and she's won a lot of awards through the school and all this stuff, but she didn't do well on the test. And also on I think it was the STAR test, right? She makes all A's in math, but on the STAR test, she did not do good at all in math. And so we were thinking about it, like, how, if you don't have the test scores, how do you have kind of an unbiased? Because we were thinking, she doesn't understand math, and are they just giving her A's? And we're like, what's an unbiased way to know that the students are learning the fundamentals, like the math and all that? Is there a better solution than that has been in discussion? Or
Well, one of the things here, when we did decide to de-emphasize the score, we did decide to stop putting up the banners. We did decide to stop touting the fact that we were an A or B school district. Ultimately, it comes down to then, like you say, how are you accountable for your kids knowing how to read and do math? I think that is probably one of the hardest questions that you try to decide as a superintendent, because ultimately it is important that they're able to show that they know how to add two and two and they know how to read. I just think that the way that we do it has to be more holistic than just that one day of a test, because you do have a lot of students that are able to do it that for whatever reason are not able to put it on paper. And you have a lot of kids that are able to put it on paper easily, and they're easily able to be differentiated as that A kid. I believe that what we try to do here in Keene is we do try to make sure that the scores they're making on their 9 or 6 weeks matches up with the scores that they're making at the end of the school year. Because there's nothing more frustrating than to see a class full where the average score for a report card is, say, a 91 or 92, but then only 55% of those kids pass the end of course test. There's like a
Mhm.
disconnect between those two. And I
Yeah.
just think it's a constant battle for teachers to make sure that what they're showing on that report card is indicative of what that kid really knows. But then there's still some of those young men and women just struggle on test. And in those kind, I think that's really where it kicks into schools like what we do, is we don't measure their success. We don't measure their worth based on that score. We measure their worth on what are they involved in? How do they treat people? Are they kind? Are they respectful? Are they all these things that honestly make a bigger difference in life than whether they can read or do math? Because honestly, almost everybody is able to eventually read and do math. And all the knowledge that you put on a test can be found on an iPhone within just seconds. So when we look at Keene ISD, what's going to make that 20, 21-year-old a better husband, a better wife, a better employee, and then better employee, a better neighbor, a better friend, a better brother or sister is going to be whether or not they can do those things that make us better as humans. And that is really why we have tried to emphasize the whole child here, um, more than just those scores. And I think a lot of public schools around the state are trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, they are. It's a common theme, and I don't know if it's a cultural thing or what but it's definitely important to have that to go in society and know how to deal with people and have this communicate. And we've had some really interesting guests that have talked about some of the soft skills. And we've had a lot of people mention the test scores, which, it's definitely spurred conversations in my household, and I'm sure some others that are listening in. Um, yeah, very interesting, and I get it with the test scores. I'm curious. So there was a. I mean, you've probably heard this. Just kind of this is just anecdotal information, I guess, where people talk about, hey, participation ribbons and that sort of thing. Is I I know when I was in school, but I'm sure when you were in school as well. If you didn't make a good grade, like you knew about it, right? Like you're not ready, so you don't get a good grade. You need to level up basically and get better. Is is it easier to get good grades these days as a whole, do you think, in the public education system, or because we don't want to hurt people's feelings, or is that I mean, what are you seeing out there just culturally related to the grading system?
I would agree with you on that to some degree. We definitely are probably to the right of participation trophies here at Keene. We're a fairly conservative school district driven by pretty conservative values. So everybody doesn't get an award here. But I do believe over the years that grades have become easier because one thing is parents expect it. They expect the grades. I think back in the old days, and I'm not sure it was more effective or even better. There was a lot more homework that was sent home.
Hmm.
The problem with that is that there's a lot of kids that we have, whether we want to admit it or not, that don't go home to a perfect home life. They get home and there's 7, 8, 9, 10 people in the household, constant disruption. There is no where to go to your room and get your homework done. So I think a lot of that work has been pushed to the school day. And then at the school day, it's a lot easier to get it done, a lot easier to get help. And so those grades improve over the past because more work is done and not as much work is done by yourself. So I think that is something you have to be real careful of when you're in education. And especially when you start getting into group projects and group work where people are getting to help each other, it's real easy for a kid to kind of slide back to the back of that crowd, maybe still get that good grade, but not really get that good knowledge.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good point, and that's definitely been a topic that we've had as well around that. Curious, speaking of group work and just kids hanging out with other kids, right? And some people say you're the average of the five people you hang out with most, right? So, um, and obviously in every school system, I went to Channelview ISD, right, a long time ago, which was a smaller school, probably not as rated as well as like my wife's school, Kingwood ISD, right? So uh, kind of opposite ends, and much smaller versus a larger school. Um, but obviously, who you hang out with makes a big difference on your grades in your future. I'm curious, has there been any talk in public education around, if you notice a group of kids that probably are kind of outcasts versus some of the other kids in the school? I mean, what type are there any programs in place or anything that help those types of kids that are just I don't know the right way to put it, but some kids are just not doing the right things and they're hanging out with other kids that aren't doing the right things. And is there a focus area on that culturally or?
Well, I think there is one of the things that we try to do here at Keene is we try to get ahead of it before that really becomes a big issue.
Hmm.
One of the ways we do that, and at our elementary through fifth grade, is the creation of after school clubs, getting these kids involved in something because at the heart of every kid, at the heart of every person, is a sense of wanting to belong. And if you don't give them as a school an area to belong, somebody will come along and give them that opportunity to belong. And a lot of times that's when you get kids that fall off the rails, is because those places they can find belonging are not appropriate and not where we want them to be. So one of the things we do is we try to have after school clubs going, you know, first grade through fifth grade. So they get and they find a passion and they find other people that have that passion. Now, once you get up into the high school level where and the junior high level, because there's a big jump from sixth to seventh or fifth to sixth grade, big jump from eighth to ninth grade, and you lose kids at both of those junctures if you don't watch it. We started a year ago a group called Mentors Care, and it's an organization across the state that comes in and they get adults in the community to volunteer 1 hour a week to actually mentor up with a kid that's in need at the high school level. So we've done that and we've got about 20 kids involved in that, seen some good results. We're just a kid that's in need having one adult that cares and knowing that adult by name, knowing that adult by number. And that's been a good thing for us too. And also in a school our size, we have, I'm guessing this number, we probably have 65 to 70% of our kids involved in something extracurricular, whether it be band, art, drama, basketball, sports, robotics. And I think those things go a long ways. Any school district that tells you they don't have kids that are in the boat that you said are just not telling you the truth. But we're blessed at Keene that number for us is very small.
Yeah, it seems like some of the smaller schools, it might be easier to nip that in the bud, and it could just because of the oversight. And I don't know, maybe the data shows the larger schools have more of an issue with that sort of thing. Because it seems like who the kids hang out with is just as important as the curriculum to a certain extent. It kind of ties back to those soft skills too.
Yeah, Gary, and I'll go a little different route from what you said, but on that same line, I believe that's true when you look at teachers. I believe that teachers and who they pair up with and team up with makes a
Mm,
huge difference. You get sometimes in some districts you'll get a teacher group that might be negative,
mm.
and they all start getting together, and all of a sudden that affects their ability to teach and educate. Whereas the opposite is also true. When you create a culture and you create an environment at your school district where teachers want to be there, they like being there, and they have the same vision and mission and passion. Now that same thing you're talking about with kids, where peer groups influence, I think peer groups influence those teachers, and they drive each other to be awesome and to be amazing and to educate kids. So I think it works both ways, adults and kids.
That's so interesting you say that because there was I read a lot of business books and go to conferences like a lot of people and there was a talk at one and it was talking about public education and they were talking about how students look up to the teachers and how the teachers habits and how they present themselves and how they communicate, like all of that is being transferred to the student basically because they're almost like a mentor, or a person they look up to. So I could see that, right? I could definitely see that how that could make an impact long term on students because if it's like anybody, if we're hanging out with we got to police ourselves to a certain degree
Mm-hmm.
with who we hang out with. Well, very cool. So we're running short on time here, but before we get too far ahead, I'd love to hear what's coming up with your district on the horizon? Anything exciting coming up in the next 12 months or longer or
Yeah, we being such a small school district, land mass wise, we don't have a whole lot of industry, but we're starting to see some growth. So we've got about 300, no, we got 400 homes that should be built in the next 2, 3 years, which is going to bring about 240 kids to us, which at our size is about 19 kids a grade level, which means we're going to need another classroom per grade level in our district. So we are in the beginning stages of trying to come up with a bond for next November. Not a huge build the Taj Mahal high school, but how can we take our monies and add needs at these buildings? So that's going to be really on our focus as we grow kid wise and as our town grows. Is how do we match that up? And one of the challenges for Keene is how do we fund what we need before the people live here that need it, trying to stay ahead of the eight ball on that one. So we're excited. We talked about it in a board meeting on Monday. We're going to be starting talking about it around the community in the next month or two and get committee groups going. It's an exciting time here, but it's It's not going to be crazy growth like some of the metroplexes because we're so small landmass. But right around us, adjacent to us, we got about 800 homes coming in. And a unique thing I didn't mention about Keene ISD, of our 1,150 kids, we have about 470 transfer students. So almost 40% of our kids don't have to go here, but choose to go here.
Mm.
So that's all a puzzle piece that you got to move around when you start looking at growth.
Yeah, that is very exciting. That's a lot of growth for for the area there, considering the current size and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's a significant growth, significant percentage. Um, Very interesting. Okay, now that is exciting, very exciting. Well, okay, last question here before we close out. Just who's been a mentor in your life who you think may be a good guest on the podcast? Anybody come to mind?
Well, I'll tell you, the cool thing about being a superintendent is the mentors and the friends that you form. One of the hardest decisions a superintendent ever makes is whether or not to open or close school on bad weather. And we had that, last week. And so I've got a ton of people that are in text message groups that at the drop of a hat, you can say, hey, I got this situation. Have any of y'all ever handled it? And they immediately text it back. I would say my superintendent mentor um, is a guy named Dr. Russell Marshall. A lot of your podcast may know him. He has now gone back and he's superintendent at Maybank. He is always worth a good talk. A great guy. I've got a really good, probably my best friend, and is a guy named Dr. Bobby Rice over at Harts Bluff, another 3A school. He's always a fun talk, definitely opinionated. But there are so many good guys just around my area that at the drop of a hat I can call and they can call me and say, hey, help. And that has been, it kind of goes back to what we're talking about kids and about teachers. As a superintendent, it can get lonely because there's nobody in your district that you can go to and say, hey, let's talk.
Hmm.
At certain levels. I mean, I have an assistant soup here that I trust my life with, and multiple leaders here that I do. But it's nice to have a superintendent group that you can say, hey, man, you know what I'm going through. What do you think? And so
Yeah.
that's been really good.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. Mentoring has come up quite a bit on the podcast around different mentors that have had an impact in the lives of superintendents. And at the end of the day, we're all just people, right? Trying to make a difference in
Absolutely.
this world. Well, great. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today and sharing your wisdom and your experiences and perspective on public education. I think our listeners definitely found some value in today's conversation.
Well, thanks, Gary. I appreciate the invite, and it's been real enjoyable.
Awesome. Okay. Well, before we close out, we do want to give one final shout out to our sponsor, Ideal Impact. Ideal Impact's giving away hundreds of millions of dollars to public education in the form of a free gift. So if your district needs unrestricted funds, reach out to Ideal Impact. And for those that have been tuning in, stay tuned for future episodes of the Educational Leadership Podcast.